Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. Today we are talking about all of the books that I read in July and August of this year. The last wrap-up video that I posted was for all of Q2, so it was 3 months of reading, and I felt like that video was just a little bit long. There was so much content to cover because I did read a lot of books in those 3 months, so I decided to follow the format of some other booktubers that I've seen and do wrap-ups every 2 months, which seems to be about like an average of like 8 to 12-ish books or so, which seems like a pretty decent amount to be able to cover in one video. So this is going to be my wrap up for everything I read in July and August. It is literally September 1st, Labor Day, as I'm recording this. I waited until the last minute because I really was trying to get a book finished last night. Actually, 2 books finished, and I did so that I could add them to this wrap up. So without further ado, let's just jump in and talk about all the books that I read. Oh, I need to put up my stats for the last 2 months, so I'm going to do that here because I haven't actually calculated them yet, so I don't actually know how many genres I read or what my average rating was. But I'm going to guess that my average rating was a little bit lower. I'm going to say it was probably under 4 stars. I definitely had a handful of 3-star ratings this time around, and I know that there is a 1 and a 2-star rating in here as well, so look forward to those. Actually, they're like the first couple books I'm going to talk about. So, and yeah, let's just get into it. So the first book that I read in July was My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa Moshfegh. And I picked this book up because I knew that it was literary fiction. I wanted something that would make me think. I wanted something that would spark in me just all the things that I love about literary fiction, which is potentially unlikable characters that have strong motivations that I can diagnose. I had just come off of reading From Blood and Ash, which was terrible, and before that, The Summer We Ran, which was even more terrible. I really wanted something that was comforting to me. So when that's the case, I usually turn to literary fiction. So I picked it up, and it was interesting, to say the least. This book deals with themes of depression and drug abuse, drug addiction, eating disorders. There are a lot of heavy topics in this book, but I feel like they were handled in a weirdly kind of like haphazard way. Like, I'm not really sure how I felt about the exploration of these topics. I'm not really sure what we were saying with them. Like, I get what this book was trying to do, but I feel like the execution was trite and just like extremely vapid. The narrator of this book is dealing with depression. She sees a psychiatrist who prescribes her a litany of medication. Basically, she starts to abuse prescription drugs. She's prone to blackouts and just in general kind of weird behavior. But she does have one friend who visits her often, who she despises. The book basically follows our narrator's year of rest and relaxation. She is not working for a year and basically just abusing prescription drugs and hating her friend the whole time. And it kind of goes from there. It gets very intense near the end, so I'm not going to spoil anything, obviously, but it started off so well. I really enjoyed the first 50 pages or so. We meet her friend who comes over for the first time, and through this conversation that they have, I was highlighting and tabbing like crazy. I was like, this is so interesting. Metaphors that are happening here. There was a lot that was being said about each of their characters and kind of humans in a more broad sense from that, and it was really interesting. And similarly, I really enjoyed about the last 20-ish pages, but I would say everything in between the first 50 and the last 20 pages was kind of garbage. Like, I don't know that I was worth the paper that it was printed on. I hate to say it. I just genuinely didn't understand what the point was. And I'm not saying that this was a bad book because I didn't like the main character. I think it was a bad book because it felt like we were stuck in this endless loop of just like apathy and privilege that this person is experiencing. She's not actually really doing anything. In my mind, like, it's really not that deep, and that's what's annoying, is that I want it to be deep. The narrator's viewpoint felt extremely nihilistic to me, which, as we have discussed when I've talked about Chuck Palahniuk books in the past, I'm not really into. Like, I kept waiting for something, literally anything, to happen. And by the time it did, we were on the last page. Don't get me wrong. I understand that the point of this book seemed to be the emptiness, like the desire to be numb and to want to disappear, but I still wanted more. There are other books where I think people deal with depression that is so much more relatable for me. It felt almost like an irresponsible viewpoint to be putting out there. I don't know. That's just me. If I'm trying to get like really self-righteous about it. I just wanted more insight. I wanted more emotion, more growth, literally anything to hang on to. It felt like it was just bleak for bleakness sake, and for that reason it was just flat and boring. I thought it was boring, so I gave it 2 stars. So yeah, didn't necessarily start July off on a great foot, but that's okay, because if we're at 2 stars, then that means we still have the ability to go downhill, and that's exactly what we did. The next book that I read in July was The Unwedding by Condie. This was the first pick in my new work book club, and we're like round robining who gets to pick each time, and this was the first pick. I just sincerely want to ask Reese Witherspoon, what on God's green earth did she see in this book? Because this genuinely was like, this book is horrible. And let me preface this by saying I don't read mystery books really at all, and this is a great example of why I generally do not enjoy them, like mysteries or whodunits, because generally they suck. You have all your classic tropes, a main character with a traumatic and secretive past, about 100 red herrings, and no actual evidence that leads us to be able to reasonably figure out what might have happened ourselves, which leads us to about 100 pages of info dumping, how we got to the end and how we figured out the mystery. Like, this plot is painfully slow, painfully. And of course it has like these weird repetitive inner monologues from our main character. There's so many sections of this weird formulaic writing style when she has these reflections that I felt like was just so unnecessary. Like, it was trying to be inventive with the structure, but it really wasn't actually doing anything. It was just making me more confused. I blocked so much of this book from my brain. I'm so over it. I had just like pages of annotations on my Kobo. I wanted to come to our book club correct. I wanted to come prepared to be able to say, here's why this book was terrible. And thankfully, pretty much everyone agreed with me that we all didn't really enjoy this book very much, so that made me feel better. There's legitimately negative levels of curiosity or suspense in this book. The murder is sidelined for over like half of the plot. I did not find this main character to be likable at all. She was so annoying. Every person was forgettable and felt more like a plot device than an actual person, and by the time something actually happened, I was legitimately too bored to care. Anyways, I hated this book and I gave it 1 star because I thought it was terribly written. This is only, I think, my second 1-star book of the year. I do not hand out 1 stars lightly. I take them very seriously, and I think that this book deserved it because it was terrible. The next book that I read was Maggie, or A Man and a Woman Walk into a Bar by Katie Yee. This was my July book of the month pick, and this book was interesting. It deals with themes of grief, of a life that you used to have in the past, divorce and infidelity and the falling out of that on a family. It deals with sickness and kind of how that permeates through our lives and also our identities. This book is about our main character and her husband, who announces to her over a buffet dinner that he has had an affair and wants to get a divorce. Basically follows the fallout of that from our main character's perspective, dealing with her husband's affair, and not long after that, she goes to the doctor and finds out that she has breast cancer. And she has to reckon with the fact that her life partner now doesn't want to be in her life anymore, and she has no one to turn to besides her best friend to deal with the emotional fallout of finding out that she has cancer. But what annoyed me is that I feel like she cared so much more about her husband's affair and his divorce than her actual cancer. There was so much resentment and exploration of the feelings of this fallout of her marriage. I feel like her actual cancer was kind of sidelined for a good chunk of the book, which I found to be a little bizarre. I think that this book was trying to do what Department of Speculation by Jenny Offill does so much better, and it's that vignette style of writing where it's just kind of written in random chunks of thoughts that we get from our main character's perspective. But what Department of Speculation does better is that even if it seems random, like we're just hearing a random story about a sparrow, it still is relative to the plot through a metaphor in some way, or through, some connection we're able to make with the main character or some development in her mental state. But in this book, there were some random ass paragraphs. Like, it was nothing. It was about like a sock or a squirrel or something. Like, it actually, I was trying so hard to make a connection and there just was none to be had. In my opinion, the book suffered because of it. Like, so many sections just kind of felt pointless. Department of Speculation is able to kind of balance the seriousness with kind of these silly off-topic comments because, again, they still end up being meaningful to the overall story and the overall plot. But here, they did nothing. Didn't really love the writing style or the overall structure, to be honest, and I just didn't really connect with the main character. I felt like the themes that we were exploring were really interesting, and there were definitely some 5-star insights in this book, but they were so few and far between that this book ultimately was just forgettable to me and became very average in my mind. So for that reason, it got 3 stars from me. It just wasn't very exciting. Next up in July, I read I Cheerfully Refuse by Leif Enger. This is a book that I have been wanting to read for over a year now, I think, since I saw Elizabeth from Plant-Based Bride recommend it so highly. And I got this from Thrift Books, so I think I got a library copy. I didn't realize that I accidentally bought the large print copy, which is really funny. I was like, wow, this book's longer than I thought it was. This book is about a couple, Rainey and Clarke, who live in a seemingly kind of dystopian Canada. I can't remember if the setting is actually explicitly described, like what time period that we're in, but it seems to be like a post kind of climate change-y situation where things are just generally a bit more unsafe. The weather is quite unpredictable and people in general are just a little bit less trusting. But one thing that Rainey and Clarke love is sailing, and they often are able to take refuge among the seas. This book basically follows his journey both on and off of this boat to search for love. It definitely took a much different path than I was expecting it to, but I definitely enjoyed it and was along for the ride. This book deals with themes of grief and found family. It deals with reading and literature sort of being seen as a higher knowledge. There are many illiterate people in this time. There was also kind of a smaller theme of music as like a healing force, which I thought was really interesting. It was simply just lovely. It was a really lovely, peaceful book. It deals with some really sad moments and themes, but ultimately this book kind of just felt like a warm hug. I really, really loved Clarke's character, and I really enjoyed Rainey too. I think that their love for each other is so sweet, and it really is kind of the beating heart of this story. I was expecting it to sort of be more about the emotional reckoning between the two of them, and I really wanted the ending to be kind of this big climactic moment, and it ended up being something completely different, and that was okay. It really became a book that was more about found family and finding connections and community with people, even when, given the state of the world, we are not really encouraged to do so. We're encouraged to be wary of other people. I'm just a romantic at heart, and I wanted this book to be a romance book, and it wasn't, and that's okay. That's okay. It was still very, very good. I do think that the third act felt slightly disjointed and like pretty quick for me. A lot was kind of happening, but overall I felt like the ending was very lovely. It was very, again, sweet and tender, and it gave me similar feelings now that I'm thinking about it to Parable of the Sower, which is a book that I just finished. A lot of actually really similar themes and concepts between these two books, but totally different executions. I don't know which one I prefer. I think I prefer I Cheerfully Refuse just because of the setting. The writing style is a little bit more my speed. I really liked it. Rainey talks, like the style of prose in this book, the way that Rainey speaks and thinks, because we're in this different America, so the linguistic style is different than what we're used to. He speaks like Moira Rose to me, the way that she talks, where she randomly kind of intersperses these large words into a seemingly normal sentence. Once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. And I love those little elements that really immerse you into the setting to continually remind you that this is not a setting that we are familiar with. It's very different, and therefore people make very different choices. So I really, really loved the setting in this book. It was so immersive. Overall, I enjoyed a lot of the themes that were being explored. So this book got 4 stars for me. It was very, very good. The last book that I read in July was The Heart Principle by Helen Hoang. And this is a book that I've had for a while. This has been on my TBR for a while. And wow, this book did not disappoint. You guys know how difficult contemporary romance is for me. And this book is, I'm gonna say, it's one of the best. I don't know if I can say it's the best, but it is one of the best. It's definitely in the top 3 of contemporary romances that I have read so far. It was so freaking good. I devoured it in like 2 days. This book is about Anna, who is a professional violinist, when her longtime boyfriend, who she presumes she'll marry, announces to her that before they get married, he wants to explore other people. He wants to have an open relationship so that he can make sure she's really the right one for him. Barf. Anna decides, actually, this guy is kind of a piece of shit. And if he wants an open relationship, then that's exactly what I'll give him. He assumes that she's not the type to want to participate in an open relationship, that he's the only one who's allowed to be unfaithful. And so she gets on a dating app and decides, I'm going to find somebody to have a one-night stand with. And that's kind of what she does. Enter Quan, who is a shaved hair, tattooed motorcycle riding hottie, and I love him. He is our main male love interest. Him and Anna basically meet up to have a one-night stand, but they don't actually end up sleeping together, and they don't for quite some time. And that is one thing that I loved about this book, because one of my main issues with contemporary romance is that so often they are full of miscommunication, trope after one, after another, after another, after another, and it's so annoying. And this book was the exact antithesis of miscommunication. There could not be better communicating hotties in this book, and I love Anna and Quan. I ship them forever. This book deals with themes of troubled family dynamics, of caretaking for our elders, the identity of being a musician, which I thought was a really fascinating subplot that I've not really explored before in a book, and healing sexual and relationship trauma, which I heavily identified with and loved every second of. I just loved the unexpected arc of Anna and Quan's relationship. It was so tender. You can tell that they really cared about each other. There was so much kindness and so much openness between the two of them that I loved. Like, this is how you communicate properly in a relationship with someone. People need to take notes from this book, because this is how it's done. The way that they are able to be patient with each other, it is so cute. Every time that they meet up to get it on, and then it doesn't happen, and then exploring kind of the fallout of it is just done perfectly. Chef's kiss. I loved every second of it. And then when we did finally get there, the spice I feel like was just the appropriate level. It was definitely spicy, but I feel like because we had the right amount of buildup, that it was like good. It was a good amount. It was tolerable. It wasn't too much, and it didn't come on too strong or too fast. There is also a subplot of Anna having to deal with caretaking for a member of her family and kind of dealing with difficult family dynamics and like kind of pressures put upon her by other people in her family and by society. And I just thought it was a really vivid and immersive exploration of that. I've never personally had to be a caretaker for someone in my family, but I imagine that this was a wonderful representation of that, of how stressful and how debilitating it can be. There's also a large neurodivergent subplot in here, which I loved. Again, as somebody with ADD, I heavily related to. I think it just really related to so many things that are happening in this book. And while at its core it was a romance novel, it dealt with a lot of difficult topics and showed how a proper relationship, a proper love between two people can really sustain those hardships in life and help you be able to navigate them and process your feelings about them. I just loved every second of it. Oh my gosh. I gave it 4 stars. I feel like I can't bring myself to giving a contemporary romance 5 stars. I'm so conflicted about it, and I don't know why. Does anybody else feel this way? Like, do you ever feel like you can't give a certain genre 5 stars just because you know that it will never, like, the best of a contemporary romance for me will never equal the best of a literary fiction? Does that make sense? I don't know. Anyways. Oh, this was actually the last book that I read in July. Okay. The actual last book that I read in July was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. Again, this is another literary fiction book that I have heard a lot about. It was finally available at my library. I think I waited like 8 weeks, which is not that long. And this book is kind of a almost generational story, but told through just the perspective of our main character as he explores the trauma that his grandmother, as someone who lived in proximity to the Vietnam War, and how that trauma shaped her, in turn shaped her daughter, his mother, and then in turn shaped him. It really is an exploration of generational trauma at its core. It also deals with abuse. It deals with war, like I mentioned, and grief, drug abuse. There are themes of identity as a person of color and also as someone who's gay. And really, I feel like at the core of it all, the kind of central theme is our will to live and to change as human beings based on our circumstances, those that are in our control and those that are not in our control, like, generational trauma, grief, things like that, that permanently affect us to our core. I really wanted this book to be amazing. I feel like, though, it was pretty similar to my Year of Rest and Relaxation, where it started out extremely promising and then it just kind of fell off. Part 1 had so many beautiful metaphors about, again, trauma and abuse and what it's like to be a person of color living in America. I was heavily annotating. I was very interested in all the things that we were exploring. That is one thing that this book does, is it is very heavy-handed with metaphors. And in part 1, I felt like they were very, very apt. They were worth analyzing to kind of their deepest parts to extract what the meaning is behind them. I particularly loved the metaphor of the monarch butterflies for kind of representing generational trauma in the first chapter. Just some really, really gorgeous metaphors in general. I really, really didn't care about Trevor at all. He is the main love interest of our main character. Because I didn't like Trevor, that's probably why I really struggled with a lot of part 2, because part 2 is basically just an exploration of their budding romance and how it unfolds. And I understand like Trevor's position in the plot as a device, to the main character. I understand that the relation and why he's there, but it pissed me off because I didn't like him and I did not believe their love. And it was just so frustrating to read about the things that our main character is experiencing because of this person. I just didn't like it. It upset me. I think I struggle in general with relationships like that. That's not putting this book in the negative column for me. It's just, something that frustrates me to read about. Then my sort of main issue I feel like with this book is that part 2 started to get real metaphor heavy. And shockingly, it was still not as heavy-handed as part 3. I mean, I think it was a 1-to-1 ratio of normal sentence to metaphor. It started to get to the point in part 3 where I did not understand what we were saying. And I am someone who loves metaphors as a plot device, as a way to invite the reader to unlock deeper meaning. I love a metaphor. This was too much for me. It was too much for me. I felt like my brain was hurting because I really was trying to understand, okay, what does this mean to say about this? And what is this saying about this? But it was just too much. Like, this to me, I feel like is the definition of purple prose, but it was like black and blue. Like, it was not purple anymore. We have passed the point of purple. Like, the bruise is dark. It also did the same broken up lines formatting thing, which I hate sometimes when it is not executed well. Why is this format like this only in this section? Like, what is the actual point aside from just trying to aesthetically be interesting? I didn't have time to look it up before I recorded, but there was definitely some Can I help you? I'm busy right now. So yeah, part 3 got real metaphor heavy and it felt like nothing was happening. There was just way too much purple prose. It hurt my brain to participate in the reading process because I felt like I was doing a disservice to the book by eventually getting to the point where I did not care to unlock the deeper meaning because it was just too much. It made me sad because I felt like I really enjoyed the first section and I really enjoyed a lot of the themes that we were exploring, and the execution in the third half just wasn't there, the third part. A lot of the through lines that I feel like needed to be there in order for the ending to make sense just weren't there. And so it left me kind of sad and confused when I finished it. So I gave it 3 stars because the concepts were extremely interesting. I really, really was invested in what the book was trying to say. And so for that reason, I got 3 stars. The first book that I read in August was This Summer Will Be Different by Carley Fortune. If you guys saw my lake reading vlog, that is the book that I was reading while I spent some time over the weekend at the lake. And I have never actually read any Carley Fortune books before, but I've heard a lot of good things about her books. I feel like they're very popular right now. They're very much like summertime reads. And so I wanted to join in on the fun. And it was fine. I feel like it falls into the category of most contemporary romances where it just kind of was fine and I didn't really have any feelings about it. It wasn't really particularly moving in any way for me, and it just kind of existed. I didn't find it particularly relatable, and I didn't find the romance particularly awe-inspiring. I think at the end of that video, I had said that I rated it 4 stars, but I pretty quickly changed my mind and dropped it down to 3 because, again, it really just wasn't, I didn't think about it at all after I finished it, and I already forgot the lead main character's name. The writing itself was lovely. I think that Carley Fortune has a really nice style of writing. I thought that the pacing was nice. I did think that the sort of alternating timeline was interesting. It basically follows our main character. She's in present day and her best friend's getting married soon, and it kind of alternates with that timeline versus like 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 1 year ago in Prince Edward Island, which is the place where she originally met Felix, the main male love interest. So I thought the timeline was interesting, how it kind of jumped back and forth between the past and the present. However, I truly just didn't really care about any of the characters. I didn't really find myself relating to the main character at all, and I kind of felt like Felix was sort of a nobody. Like, I don't know, I feel like he wasn't really developed enough for me to be a main male love interest. I just wanted more from his character. I also felt like some of the dialogue was a little cringe. I will say that romance books that are able to dodge that are pretty few and far between, so I'm not necessarily going to knock it for that. There were just some instances where I was like, okay, I'm just going to pretend like I didn't read that. So overall, it was not bad. I just didn't really care about it that much. Will I pick up another Carley Fortune book? I don't know. I'm curious if you guys have any other Carley Fortune books that you think are better than that one, because I know a lot of people really ride or die for her. So those are my thoughts on The Summer Will Be Different. So it got 3 stars for me after thinking about it a little bit longer. Then the next book that I read in August was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I have had this book on my TBR for probably, I think since like the beginning of this year. I think since January, February. And I have been anticipating it so much this whole year. I kept seeing it on my cart and just being like, I want to read that so bad. Finally made time to read it, and it was so good. It did not disappoint. This book is about Iris, who works for a newspaper alongside her supposed rival Kit, who also works for the same publication, and it basically follows them in this sort of mythical world where there is a war between 2 gods happening, and Iris decides to leave the office to become a war correspondent so that she could be closer to the front lines to try and find her brother, who is a soldier. And Iris and Kit happen to both be in possession of magical typewriters that can communicate with each other when they send letters. So it basically follows Iris's journey as a war correspondent and her and Kit writing letters back to each other, whether they realize who they're writing to or not. I really loved the mythical element of this story. I thought it was so interesting. It deals with themes of like gods and the mythic world, and also war. It also deals with like grief and loss. It also deals with propaganda, as these 2 like literary factions are writing against each other. And I really, really, really enjoyed this. This was such a fun fantasy YA novel. I haven't read something like this in a while, and it was very refreshing. The writing was so wonderful. You guys know that I love love stories where like 2 people are forced apart and are writing love letters to each other. It's like my bread and butter as like a deeply, deeply hopeless romantic person. There was so much romance and so much yearning. I just was obsessed with it. I really enjoyed a lot of the twists happening in the plot too. I didn't find it to be super predictable, which is nice. I loved the ending. The ending definitely is not what I expected. It was one of those that clearly like sets up a second book, but I didn't really mind it, and it didn't feel formulaic at all. It was really interesting, really engaging, and I immediately picked up the second book as soon as I finished the first because I needed to know what happened. I really loved Iris's character and a lot of the kind of side characters that we meet along the way when Iris goes to join the war effort. It felt very wholesome. It definitely gave vibes of like a found family story as well, and it was, I think, a really interesting exploration of propaganda and how information can be proliferated very easily without necessarily being fact-checked. I thought there was a lot of interesting themes being explored here. I definitely think the reason this novel isn't perfect is because I wanted there to be a little bit more of an exploration into those themes. It definitely felt like the romance was front and center of this novel, which is still obviously very important and still was executed very well. I just found it to be a little bit lacking in terms of thematic content for me to really kind of like dive in and explore. That was the reason I gave it 4 stars instead of 5 stars. It was a really creative and interesting concept that I haven't read before, and I loved the execution of it. I thought it was done really well. And all of those wonderful aspects were continued in the second novel, Ruthless, Vows, also by Rebecca Ross, which is what I read immediately after this book. If you guys haven't seen my Washington and Oregon vlog, I was mostly reading this book while I was on that trip, and it continues to follow Iris and Kit. I can't say much about it without spoiling it, but something big happens at the end of the first novel that forces them to be apart again. So it's similar in formula to the first book, where they still continue to write letters to each other, but under new circumstances that up the stakes. And the war is still continuing, but it's getting a lot higher stakes. We are getting closer to the end of the line, and things end with a big grand finale, and it explores all the same themes as the first book, but we expound on themes like memory, forced assimilation into the military. I also really loved the exploration of love as like a binding force, more of a physical attribute of two people. It did a lot of the same things from the first book, mostly good things, like the pacing was good. I also appreciated that we got a lot more development of some of the side characters. We definitely get more lore as far as the gods are concerned, and like the myths of these gods who are fighting each other. So that I really liked. We got like different loves between different characters. We're kind of like running the whole gambit of different relationships. I was feeling really emotional at the end of this book. I really enjoyed the climax and the ending, but I do often have this problem, I think, with fantasy novels, which is that the endings of them, especially when war is involved, tend to be rushed for my tastes. I like things to be a lot more slowed down and more fleshed out. I feel like the ending was a little bit rushed, like the climax of the war. I wish we could have slowed down a little bit and explored it a bit more and sort of been really immersed in it and understood what was at stake. That was really my only kind of criticism of this novel. Otherwise, I think it did all of the wonderful things that the first book did. It also got 4 stars for me. It wasn't quite perfect, but I thought it was just as good as the first book because it did all of the great things that the first book did. Next, in August, I listened to The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This was the second pick by someone in our work book club for August, and I have to say I was definitely interested in reading this book beforehand. I've heard a lot about it. I know that it came out, I think, like early pandemic days. Maybe I did a disservice to it by listening to it and not reading the actual physical copy of the book. This book is about Nora, who is very depressed due to some unfortunate events that have kind of happened one after another in her life, and so she decides one night to take her own life. She ends up in a library, and in this library she's presented with a book of regrets. She is able to look through and read all of the regrets that she's had in her life, and then she can decide to change one of those regrets and live out what that life would be in the library. So all of the books on the shelves represent different lives that she has in a multiverse. I thought that the premise of this book sounded very interesting. I didn't really know anything about it before I read it. Very sad, especially the beginning. Like I didn't know that somebody was about to take their own life, and it was kind of jarring. This book deals with a lot of heavy topics like regret, our identity and how it's shaped through our choices, depression and suicidal ideation, but ultimately it's about finding joy in your life and living without fear of regret. I have really gone back and forth like on my score about this book because I cannot deny that it's a well-written book. I just did not really relate to much of the content in here, and I say that as someone who has also experienced situational depression like Nora's. I just found her to be unrelatable in a lot of ways as someone who's been sort of in a similar position, and I know that obviously not everyone in the world is like me, but it got really grating how much she would just suck the joy out of everything in her life and the subsequent lives that she tries on. She was always able to very quickly identify the things wrong with her life, and I understand that that's the point, but that is not really something that I care to read about. It was just hard for me to relate to the premise in general as someone who does not really focus on my regrets in life, and we kind of talked about this in my book club because I was really curious if there are people out there who seem to, like Nora, be very, very emotionally impacted and stunted by all of these regrets that they have in their life. I'm sure that I have a lot that I'm not thinking of, but if I were to be presented with a book of regrets, I feel like it would not be very large because I just do not spend my time thinking about all of the different choices that I could have made in my life. It was just hard to relate to a lot of the content in this book. Again, I think it was well written. I just wanted it to have more depth overall in terms of the execution. Like I think that the premise was interesting, but I think I struggle with how it is tied in relation to depression. And I also knew immediately how the book was going to end after the very first life that she inhabited. So from then on, you know, she tries on however many more, and I was listening on 2.5 times speed because I was like, I'm just ready for this to be over. I know how it's going to end, and I don't really care about all the in-between. It truly to me felt like a self-help book that was disguised as fiction. Like the constant repetition of these like profound revelations that she's having, it felt clunky in the narrative. I don't need to be hit over the head 7 different times that life is worth living. Like we as the reader get it. We don't need another 200 pages of this novel to understand. I do want to say that if this book really did speak to people who suffer from situational depression or, you know, need a mindset change and were able to kind of look at their lives differently after reading this book, I think that that's wonderful. And I really hope that that is the case, that this book was able to reach people like that. It just did not reach me. I just personally feel like this sort of magical in-between world, it was an interesting concept, but it didn't feel like an interesting or profound way to explore depression and suicidal ideation. I almost wish that the two topics would have been separated from each other, but I don't really know. It just didn't really appeal to me personally in its execution. So when I first finished it, I thought it was 3 stars. And then when we talked about it at book club, I thought maybe it was 2 stars. And I still feel like I'm sitting at 2 stars. I thought maybe I would put it back up to 3, but I didn't like it. I didn't like the book. And often when I rate books 3 stars, to me, there were likable things about them. They were just kind of average, but for me, I did not like this book. Therefore, I think it's gotta be down to 2 stars. So I feel bad because I know a lot of people really liked this book. I just don't think that it was a book for me. And then we quickly redeemed ourselves because I read the first book as part of my Powell's reading vlog, which will not be out by the time that this video goes live, but it will be coming out very soon, and I'm so excited for it. If you guys saw our Washington vlog, we did spend a day going to a couple different Powell's locations, and I bought a book from every floor, and I am currently in the midst of reading and reviewing them right now, and it's going so well. Definitely make sure that you stay tuned to watch it. And the first book that I read as part of that video was Piranesi by Susanna Clarke, and y'all, the hype about this book is for real. I loved this book. I mean, you can see that I loved it. And I'm not going to say too much about these last 3 books because I'm going to talk about them a lot more in depth in the video. So if you're interested, definitely make sure you check out that video. But what I will say is this book is so freaking good. This story follows Piranesi, a presumed scientist and explorer who is stuck in this labyrinth that he has basically cataloged as far as he has been humanly able to. It goes on forever. There's seemingly no end to this labyrinth and he is stuck here. Doesn't seem to have memory of a place other than being in this house. Therefore, he has a very deeply spiritual religious connection to this house. There's only one other live person who lives in this labyrinth, or so he believes, and that person is called the Other. And they meet twice a week to discuss their journey to find this secret knowledge of life to help them have magical powers or be enlightened or control lesser human beings. This book was a whirlwind. It deals with a lot of really interesting themes like class disparity and control and domination. It has to deal a lot with knowledge, which you guys know is a topic that I love exploring in books, specifically access to knowledge, basically giving you a higher status or a higher power over others. It deals with complacency, and spiritual and religious connection. It deals with science and the pursuit of knowledge, and also identity and memory. There's a lot going on here, and it is very confusing in the beginning because we are trying to figure out why he's in this house and what the heck is going on. And that was my favorite part. I loved it. I loved every second of it. Just trying to figure out who is this person and how things that he's experiencing in the house are contradictory and horrific to us because we wouldn't want to be trapped there, but he's happy there. And ultimately, this book's message really is to enjoy and have a positive outlook on the little things in life that we have control over and choose to see our world in a more positive light, which is not the message that I knew I was, signing up to be taught when I read this book, but it was so pleasantly surprising and wonderful. The ending, it's very tender and very sweet. There was a lot of really interesting religious parallels to the Bible in here that I thought were really interesting and worth exploring. I already know that I want to reread it because it was so good. I won't say too much more about it because I don't want to spoil the other video, but I definitely recommend reading this. It's a short read. I read it in less than 24 hours. It was a page turner for sure. This was my first and only 5-star read between the months of July and August. So it's definitely one of my favorite books that I've read in a hot minute. The second to last book I read in August was also part of the same video, Reading Books from Powell's. This book I got in the self-help section, and this was Hold Me Tight by Sue Johnson. This is a nonfiction book. This book is an exploration of emotionally focused couples therapy, which was developed by Sue Johnson and has an astounding success rate of 75% in couples. This book talks a lot about relationships and sort of dealing with conflict in between them through the lens of attachment, and it compares relationships to sort of the nurturing bond that a child has with its mother. So Sue Johnson developed a form of couples therapy that is a lot more tied to emotions than typical couples therapy had been before. It was definitely a very interesting look at conflict within relationships. It was chock full of real world examples from recordings of her actual sessions. So it was very thought-provoking listening to other couples and the way that they speak to each other. But I did pick up this book hoping that it would help me kind of understand communication in my own relationship a little bit better. I'm very interested in psychology in general, and specifically like couples psychology. There was a lot happening here, and while there was some really thought-provoking data, I found it kind of difficult to wade through. It just seems like the amount of information and steps, this approach still seems like it needs the facilitation of a third party like a therapist. So I definitely found myself certainly enlightened from reading it. There were a lot of interesting tidbits that I did pick up and that I wanted to share with Jessie and with other people. I just ultimately was kind of not that excited by it. This is why I don't often read a lot of nonfiction, because it is really difficult for my brain to be interested in the topic if it's not presented in the right way. And I unfortunately don't feel like the information here was presented in the right way. I think that it could have been a lot more concise. It did not need to be so long. So unfortunately for that reason, I gave it 3 stars. While there was definitely some interesting insights and data to take away from it, I on the whole feel like it didn't really add very much to my life or my understanding of communications within relationships. And lastly, the last book that I read in August that I finished last night, I actually finished both of those books last night, but also as part of my pals reading vlog, and that was Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. And this book was a doozy. I still cannot believe that this book was written in the 90s. Parable of the Sower follows Lauren, who is a Baptist preacher's daughter, and it takes place now. It starts in, I think, 2024. It basically is Butler's view of the world if things back in the 90s had progressed unchecked to their ultimate end, which is that now we are living in anarchy with very limited access to water and resources. People who are able to live in a community that is gated and walled up as far as the eye can see are privileged, and those who live on the outside are living in squalor in the slums, and they often turn to very dangerous lives of stealing, killing, lots of other horrible things. This book, there's a lot of really upsetting content in this book, but ultimately the themes that it's exploring are found family and community. There is a huge through line of religion as Lauren kind of turns away from her father's Christian faith and decides to explore her own religion, which she calls Earthseed. So you can tell that the title, Parable of the Sower, is very apropos. It obviously deals with restriction of resources from the poor and their lack of access, and how those in power and those who have money would like to keep it that way for their own sake. There was a really interesting theme of just being aware of your surroundings culturally and socially and being prepared for what is to come versus those who choose to be complacent and to not be forward thinking, which I found really compelling. This was such an interesting novel. It's kind of freaky again to imagine that so much of what Butler was predicting could come true in this time that we're living in now. We're not that many steps removed from these possibilities, so it's quite freaky to think about. I will say I did not find this book to be life-changing like I feel like so many people do, as acclaimed as this book is. It definitely deserves all of its flowers. I do think that Butler, she has a masterclass in perception and her being able to tell the future and her ability to read people and understand them and their emotions and their motivations. She is wonderful at that, and her style of writing, very interesting. Her prose is really thought-provoking. It's not my favorite writing style that I have ever read, and that is kind of another reason why I didn't find it to be mind-blowing, but it is still very, very good. Her ability to tell a story is just so impressive, and the themes in this book I think are just as relevant today, if not more, than they were in the 90s when these books were published. There was a lot of interesting metaphors happening in this book, and the exploration of religion is really kind of one of the larger themes being explored here. I do have a lot to say about that, and I do think that it's thought-provoking. I just wanted it to be explored maybe with a little bit more depth, and this is something that I talk about more in the actual review video. I also wanted the ending to have a little bit more. I was expecting just a larger climax, something a little bit more kind of plot driven to happen. I did still really like the ultimate ending that we got. I just kind of think that I wanted a little bit more from the plot. It does definitely set up the second book, which I need to buy because I want to read it for sure. I can see how a lot of people, especially those who are not religious, would relate to the themes of this book and of Earthseed and kind of the concepts around that. Lauren's seed is sort of being scattered, similar to the parable of the sower. So I can see why so many people love, and cherish this book. I still thought it was wonderful. It just didn't have that, je ne sais quoi that makes books perfect for me. So this book got a hearty 4 stars, and I'm very, very excited to read the next one. We made it to the end. That was still kind of a lot of books. Oh my gosh. For 2 months, I definitely did a lot of reading the past couple months, and I have a lot to do coming up. I'm so curious if you guys have read any of the books that I mentioned in this video. I feel like I hit quite a few popular reads in these last couple months. I know some of you guys have read them, and I want to know what your thoughts are. If you agree with my takes, if you disagree, what your favorite reads were the last couple months. I'm very excited to finish reading the books that I'm reading as part of the Pals video, and I just recently thrifted some other books. I might do a thrift haul soon when I accumulate a couple more books, but I have some books that I'm really excited then too. So I feel like pretty much from now until honestly probably the end of the year, my TBR is pretty full. Definitely stay tuned for more reviews because they are coming. I have a lot of exciting videos planned for the next couple months, so I am really excited to see you guys next time. And yeah, that's it. See you later. Bye.
Oh my gosh! Who's this? Who's this? Oh my gosh! I see a little nose poking out somewhere.
I'm gonna lick all my lipstick off. Okay. Oh!
Lick off the lipstick.
The only thing that would make it better is peanut butter on the lip.
I use it 3 times a day.
You got 3 peanut butters a day, and you look at me like that when I say the words, as if you're going to get 4.
He's licking his lips.
You are a crazy doggy. Goodbye to both of you.